was little, maybe 7 years old. In my old house, my room had its own floor. It wasn't even supposed to be a bedroom. It was attached to the attic or closet type of room. The people who owned this house before us used it as a playroom for their daughters. My room also had a huge closet door that was attached to the attic. The closet was built high, so you had to climb a wooden ladder to get in. It had a big sliding door, and it was full of my childhood toys and other junk. Since I was little, I was always scared of being so different from the rest of my family, and I had that huge closet in my room. Then one night I was lying in bed scared after watching a scary movie with my family, and then I heard a toy in the closet. I jumped out of my bed and ran to my parents' room. They told me that there was no one in my closet. They saw how scared I was, so they let me sleep in their room that night. The next night I kind of forgot about it until I heard it again, the sound of Legos being scattered in the cupboard. I ran to my parents' room and told them that my dad was getting impatient with me. He reluctantly agreed to let me sleep in their room again. The next day my mom and I checked the cupboard and saw a pile of Legos on the floor. I thought it was proof that someone was in my cupboard, but my mom assured me that it had fallen that night. My dad closed the door. He said he was tired of my nonsense. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in complete silence with my little boy. I kept running around waiting for another sound to come from the cupboard. It probably broke the silence about an hour before it happened. The sound of the cupboard door opening, moonlight forcing through my window. The figure standing next to my cupboard door lit up. I let out the most terrifying, ear-splitting scream you've ever heard. Pure terror coursed through my body, a feeling that I still remember to this day as the statue jumped out of the closet and out my front door. My mother ran. My house was in shock as my father ran downstairs, trying to catch whoever it was, but he never did. The police never caught the man. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip called the Louisiana Tour. It was basically a tour of important places in southern Louisiana. One of the places we went to was Myrtle Grove, which is said to be one of the most haunted places in the country, and there are all sorts of stories about the place. But at one point we were standing in a room as part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something that I don't remember. As I stood there, then I started to hear something like someone hitting the piano keys. After I heard it a few times, I started to look. I couldn't see the piano for the source of the sound, but I could hear it over and over again, so I asked my friends who were standing near me if they had heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said it was coming again. They must have heard it. They thought I was crazy, so I started looking around the room again. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide. Except for one woman. She pointed at me and then looked questioningly at her ear. I realized she was asking if I had heard it too. I nodded. The tour guide started telling a story about a soldier who had died there, and he played the piano, and many guests reported hearing him play at night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I still hadn't. I spoke to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she said she had heard it just like me, but her husband and son hadn't. It was around Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said he was going to tell a story about his parents' first date, which he said he didn't like because it was actually true. But we encouraged him to pursue it. The parents' first date was wonderful, albeit awkward, and at that point they said goodnight. The guy in the situation, my friend's father, suggested they go for a midnight hike in Provo Canyon. He obviously knew the place because he had done some rock climbing in the area, so the two of them drove up to the canyon wall. They got out of the car and started hiking by the starlight. Since it was a new moon, at one point the guy started to get a bad feeling because the path ahead was under some trees. It was dark, and it was getting late, so he ignored the feeling, and a minute later the feeling came back to the guy. He ignored it again and started walking a little further toward the trees. When his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path under the tree, it was dark and the feeling was stronger than ever. Instead of trying to figure out what had hit him, both he and the woman agreed to come out of there years later. After being married for a while, they were watching an interview with serial killer Ted Bundy when he was asked to describe the closest he came to being caught. He explained the night he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and killed her after hearing some people coming up the path. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to see a man walk into the body and for some reason just turn around and leave. My school library is open until 2 o'clock in the morning for idiots like me who don't write essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building and most of the books are in a basement area called the stacks, so you can get a quick orientation. There are big stairs that go down to the stacks, a vending machine room and a long corridor with 4 entrances. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway with lots of bookshelves and study desks. On the wall I was there last year around 11 p.m. It was quite a research paper, so I was working on a stack of desks in the stack so I didn't have to go up and down again. I was there for probably 2 hours and everyone had already left except for one guy working at a desk a few desks below me. I was pretty zoned out by now. It was 8 a.m. I didn't have much time before class ended, so I was pretty panicked. So when someone was flipping through books very quickly and making loud whipping noises on the other side of the room, I got really angry. I ignored it for a while thinking they would eventually go away, but they kept doing it after about 5 minutes. I got annoyed with it and asked them to walk over to break it up. I walked about 3 steps across the room and it stopped. I sat down again and it was quiet again for about 10 minutes. Then the sound of the pages turning started again, louder, as if they were holding a huge book. At that point the boy started to get angry and he stood up and started looking around the bookshelves trying to find them. It kept going, so I got up and started looking around with him. It got really loud and by then it was obvious where it was coming from, so we started walking towards him. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other side. We walked under the shelves. No one was there. When we looked inside the room, there was a door with a door that no one could have entered. No one could have entered without seeing us. The sound stopped again and we both slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was a fan in the other room or something. I really needed to finish my essay. We sat down and immediately the sound started again. It seemed to be coming from right next to the guy's chair. He poured things into his bag. He looked at me and said and got off. I got out of there, maybe 5 seconds behind. I still won't go back to the pier again at night, even when others are down. Music, it happened when my fishing boat was there. It was a horrible experience that will never leave us. My wife and I had set off from the East Coast for our 2-day fishing trip in the North Atlantic. The first day and night were normal. We caught a good catch at night. We played cards while listening to music. It was enjoyable until the next night. After a slow day at sea, we were playing cards again this night without music. Just then we heard the sound of the boat's motor. We ran outside, saw a man driving an old motorboat with no lights on at all. He stopped right in front of our bow. The man was middle-aged, had a beard and a baseball cap. I approached him and asked if he needed help. He asked if we had any spearfishing gasoline. I apologized and said we didn't. I asked the man if he was low on fuel and needed to get back to shore. But he denied it. He claimed he had plenty of petrol, which brought an uncomfortable silence. My wife and I wondered why he was inviting us as guests. Then silence began to surround me and my wife as he stared blankly at me. All I could see was the light on the front deck of our boat. We were surrounded by darkness when the man finally broke the silence and asked us if we had had any good days. I told him we were still trying to be polite, even though the situation was strange and scary. I asked the man how he was getting around in the dark, but he just gave me a smile as if I was joking. I thought he had misheard me. He turned his little motorboat around and said one last thing to us. It was nice to meet you. He walked away into the total darkness around us. My wife and I were completely taken aback. My wife told me she was afraid he was going to rob us. As a fisherman, we always talked to other sailors and fishermen. But I knew there was something about the man because he had come so far at night and was alone in that little motorboat, and his behavior made us both really uncomfortable, so I decided to turn off our lights and sail a little further north so the man wouldn't find us again. Later that night, probably around 2 a.m., I was called a ghost. In the morning, I woke up from my L position to the disturbing and ear-splitting screams of my wife and saw a man standing by our bed. I jumped out of bed towards the man, but before I could leave the room, he had left the cabin. I heard the same motorboat starting and quickly left again in the dark. We returned to shore that night and reported the man immediately. Of course, the matter was never heard of again. We still don't know what the man wants or what he's planning to do, but it still gives me nightmares that there's a small alcove opposite my bedroom where no light comes in because the cupboard is slightly in front, so the cupboard blocks out the ceiling light and the outside light when it's dark. I was in my 4th year of high school at the time and was trying to sleep, but wouldn't you know someone was watching you? I could feel it, I couldn't shake it, and it felt like everything was staring. There was so much evil intent towards me that I opened my eyes and my gaze was drawn to that dark corner of the room where I saw a vague dark outline. My cheeks flushed, but I thought it was nothing. I was just imagining things. I closed my eyes again and tried to force myself to sleep, but I couldn't shake that bad feeling. Then there was the sound of someone pushing on the floor. I opened my eyes again and that shadow thing was in the opposite corner. Now all my inner senses went ballistic and I threw my pillow and blanket over my head and I cried myself to sleep. I was hoping that thing wouldn't come close. I know I didn't imagine it or dream it, and it still sends chills down my spine. It was the first time my family had ever gone camping together. I was 18, when we probably wouldn't have gone if it weren't for my brother and sister who were still only 11 and happened to be twins. It was mid-July and I was really excited to do it. We drove to the village we hadn't been to where my dad had just parked at a camping site. The car was on a quiet side road and we walked about a mile to find a little spot in the woods. We pitched our 2 tents, one for me and my siblings and one for my parents. So when night came I couldn't sleep. Trying to sleep in a sleeping bag was like sleeping on the grass. I couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning and trying to make myself comfortable. My little brother and sister had been sleeping for a long time. Then I heard the sound of the tent zipper. I looked up and saw someone poking their head in the tent. I couldn't see who it was. Dad. I whispered, "Whoever does this, get their head out of the tent." I shouted, "Whoever does this, get out of the tent quickly." I was so confused by the opening of the tent that I was sure it was either my mom or dad looking for me, so I crawled out of the tent and into my parents' tent. I opened the tent and went inside. Both my parents were in their sleeping bags. I shook Dad awake. I asked him if he had looked for us. He said no. When he said no, I felt cold. Then I woke up Mom, hoping it was him. But she told me that he hadn't come out of the tent. I started shivering all over. I realized that someone had actually come into our tent. Unzip and look at a stranger inside. I know, suffering from some kind of mental illness. I can't really say if my parents took me seriously. Or maybe I don't, but I remember not sleeping a minute that night. My parents were in Key West on their honeymoon. When they came to check in at the hotel, they were told that the room would be non-smoking because my father was a smoker. They requested a separate room. I pressed the switch for the room and went to their room as they got off the elevator. The smell of fresh paint was wafting down the hall. There was a painter there, and he had all the necessary supplies around him. As he was painting the walls, my parents walked past him. They greeted him and the painter didn't acknowledge their presence at all. Anyway, when they got to their room, the smell of paint was even worse, so bad that it was unbearable. So they decided to go to the front desk to change rooms. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked very confused and informed them that there was no scheduled paint job on that floor for that day, but they agreed to change their room anyway. My parents went back to their floor to get their luggage and the painters were completely gone. They cleaned everything up and left within 10 minutes and the smell of the paint was completely gone. At this point my parents were scared but didn't think much of it and went to their new room the next morning on their way to breakfast. They overheard a tour guide talking to a group. While my parents were talking to them, the guide mentioned the floor they were originally supposed to be on a long time ago. There was a painter there. Now my parents don't usually believe in the paranormal after painting that floor and falling down the elevator shaft to their death, but after an incident that they had no explanation for, they were pretty scared. This story didn't happen to me, it happened to my cousin, but it still makes me shudder to think about it. This story is absolutely true. My cousin Nikki was on Skype with her girlfriend Sam at around 1 p.m. on Friday night. She was asking him to come over and spend the night, but he didn't really want to drive so late. Nikki noticed that the closet door behind Sam was open, showing a crack. Nikki pointed and Sammy turned and looked at the closet. They both ignored it. After probably half an hour of talking, The closet door opened. Nikki saw it again and told Sam that her little brother must be hiding in the closet. He denied it and said that the window was open, or something, so there must be something. About half an hour later, the closet door opened completely and someone came out of the closet and walked out of Sam's bedroom. Sam didn't notice, but what Nikki saw shocked him. He told her that his little brother was hiding in his closet. But what he said scared Nikki. Nikki told him that he was home alone at night. Nikki started screaming at the screen, telling him to close the door and call the police and get there as soon as possible. Sam began to understand the situation. Seeing the closet door completely open, he ran to his door and screamed bloodshot, closed the door and locked it. Nikki drove as fast as he could. When he got there to call the police, the front door was open. So he ran into Sam's room. He knocked on the door and said it was him. But he didn't answer. When the police finally arrived, they opened the door and found him curled up in the corner of the room. Shocked, he later told the police that he had seen someone standing in the doorway facing him before he closed the door. It was a dark and stormy night. The kind of stormy I like to watch thunder and lightning roar, so I stayed up late watching movies. I was staying with my dad, but he wasn't home that night. After I finished watching Forrest Gump for the 100th time, he was working the night shift. I decided around 2 a.m. It was a good time to go to bed during a storm. I really liked listening. Suddenly I heard something hitting my window. It wasn't raining, but in such a big storm I didn't think much of it and kept my head down. A few seconds later something hit the window again with the same sound. This time I heard a sound like a rock hitting the window. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be my dad. He would call out if something was wrong or another rock would hit the window. I locked myself in bed. I didn't want to look out the window, but the people outside definitely knew I was upstairs. I turned off the TV. They could see the bright light through the window. I decided that if I ignored it, they would leave. Another rock hit the window and then it started raining harder. That's when I heard the sound of a truck engine running down the street. I pointed at the window and made my way up the stairs to the phone, but as I went through the front door, I saw something through the glass window above the door. It was a man's face looking at me. It seemed to have a smile on its face. I ran to the kitchen and called the police. They said an officer was nearby and they should be there in a moment. Whoever was near the door started banging on the door handle and finally tried to break it down. I grabbed a knife for protection and shouted that the police were coming and then went back upstairs to my room. After about a minute the banging on the door stopped and no more rocks hit my window. I still didn't dare look out the window, but I remember hearing the truck drive away a few minutes later. I heard police sirens outside and a few moments later the doorbell rang. I explained everything to the officer. I gave him as much facial description as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't give him any information about the car if I had looked out the window. I still regret not looking out sooner. The police didn't have enough information to catch these guys, not sure if they had any intention of breaking into my house or worse. I grabbed a knife to defend myself and yelled that the police were coming. Then I went back upstairs to my room. After about a minute the banging on the door stopped and no more rocks hit my window. I still didn't have the courage to look out the window, but I remember hearing the truck drive away. A few minutes later I heard the sound of police sirens outside and a few moments later the doorbell rang. I explained everything to the officer. I gave as much verbal description as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't give him any information about the car if I had looked out the window. I still regret not looking out quickly. The police didn't have enough information to catch these guys. I wasn't sure if they intended to rob my house or worse. I tried to break it in. I grabbed a knife to defend myself and yelled that the police were coming. Then I ran back upstairs. After about a minute the banging on the door stopped and no more rocks hit my window. I still didn't have the courage to look out the window, but I remember hearing the truck drive away. A few minutes later I heard police sirens outside and a moment later the doorbell rang. I explained everything to the officer. I gave him as much facial description as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't give him any information about the car if I had looked out the window. I I still regret not looking out quickly. The police didn't have enough information to catch these guys. I wasn't sure if they intended to rob my house or worse.